Hello everybody, Kemo Sabi here, coming at you with another video. So this one's off of Global Research CA webpage. I read it by Larry Romanoff, published March 4th, 2020, with the topic of China's coronavirus, a shocking update. Did the virus originate in the US? Japan, China, and Taiwan reports on the origin of the virus. The Western media quickly took the stage and laid out the official narrative for the outbreak of the new coronavirus, which appeared to have begun in China, claiming it to have originated with animals at a wet market in Wuhan. In fact, the origin was for a long time unknown, but it appears likely now, according to Chinese and Japanese reports, that the virus originated elsewhere from multiple locations, but began to spread widely only after being introduced to the market. More to the point, it appeared that the virus did not originate in China, and according to reports in Japanese and other media, may have originated in the US. Chinese researchers conclude the virus originated outside of China. After collecting samples of the genome in China, medical researchers first conclusively demonstrated that the virus did not originate at the seafood market, but had multiple unidentified sources, after which it was exposed to the seafood market, from where it spread elsewhere. According to the Global Times, a new study by Chinese researchers indicates the novel coronavirus may have began human-to-human transmission in late November from a place other than the Hunan seafood market in Wuhan. The study, published by ChinaXiv, a Chinese open repository for scientific researchers, reveals the new coronavirus was introduced to the seafood market from another location, and then spread rapidly from the market due to the large number of close contacts. The findings were the result of analysis of the genome data, sources of infection, and the route of spread of variations of the novel coronavirus collected throughout China. The study believes that patient 0 transmitted the virus to workers or sellers at the Hunan seafood market, the crowded market easily facilitating further transmission of the virus, which caused a wider spread in early December 2019. Global Times, February 22nd, 2020, emphasis added. Chinese medical authorities and intelligence agencies then conducted a rapid and wide-ranging search for the origin of the virus, collecting nearly 100 samples of the genome from 12 different countries on 4 continents, identifying all the varieties and mutations. During this research, they determined the virus outbreak had begun much earlier, probably in November, shortly after the Wuhan military games. They then came to the same independent conclusions as the Japanese researchers, that the virus did not begin in China, but was introduced there from the outside. China's top respiratory specialist, Zhang Nanshang, said on January 27th, though the COVID-19 was first discovered in China, it does not mean that it originated from China, but that is Chinese for it originated someplace else in another country. This, of course, raises questions as to the actual location of origin. If the authorities pursued their analysis through 100 genome samples from 12 countries, they must have had a compelling reason to be searching for the original source outside China. This would explain why there was such difficulty in locating and identifying a patient 0. Japan's media, the coronavirus may have originated in the US. In February of 2020, the Japanese Asahi news report, print and TV, claimed the coronavirus originated in the US, not in China, that some or many of the 14,000 American deaths attributed to influenza may in fact have resulted from the coronavirus. A report from a Japanese TV station disclosing a suspicion that some of those Americans may have unknowingly contracted the coronavirus have gone viral on Chinese social media, stoking fears and speculations in China that the novel coronavirus may have originated in the US. The report by TV Asahi Corporation in Japan suggested that the US government may have failed to grasp how rampant the virus have gone on U.S. soil. However, it is unknown whether Americans who have already died of influenza have contracted the coronavirus. As reported by TV Asahi, People's Daily English, February 23, 2020, emphasis added, on February 14th, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, said they will begin to test individuals with influenza-like illness for the novel coronavirus at public health labs in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, Chicago, and New York City. The TV Asahi network presented scientific documentation for their claims, raising the issue that no one would know the cause of death because the U.S. either neglected to test or failed to release the results. Japan avoided the questions of neutral versus man-made and accidental versus deliberate, simply stating that the virus outbreak may first have occurred in the U.S. The Western Internet appears to have been scrubbed of this information, but the Chinese media still reference it. These claims stirred up a hornet's nest not only in Japan, but in China, immediately going viral on Chinese social media, especially since the military World Games were held in Wuhan in October, and it had already been widely discussed that the virus could have been transmitted at that time from a foreign source. Perhaps the U.S. delegates brought the coronavirus to Wuhan, and some mutation occurred to the virus, making it more deadly and contagious and causing a widespread outbreak this year. People's Daily, February 23, 2020. Shen Yai, an international relations professional at Shanghai's Fudan University, stated that global virologists, including the intelligence agencies, were tracking the origin of the virus. Also of interest, the Chinese government did not shut the door on this, the news report stated. Citizens are encouraged to actively partake in discussions, but preferably in rational fashion. In China, that is meaningful. If the reports were rubbish, the government would clearly state that and tell people to not spread false rumors. Taiwan virologist suggests the coronavirus originated in the U.S. Then Taiwan ran a TV news program on February 27th that presented diagrams and flowcharts suggesting the coronavirus originated in the U.S. Below is a rough translation, summary, and analysis of selected contents of the newscast. The man in the video is a top virologist and pharmacologist who performed a long and detailed search for the source of the virus. He spends the first part of the video explaining the various haplotypes, varieties, if you will, and explains how they are related to each other, how one must have come before another, and how one type derived from another. He explains this is merely elementary science and nothing to do with geopolitical issues, describing how, just as with numbers in order, 3 must always follow 2. One of his main points is that the type infecting Taiwan exists only in Australia and the US. Since Taiwan was not infected by Australians, the infection in Taiwan could have come only from the US. The basic logic is that the geographical location with the highest diversity of virus strains must be the original source, because if a single strain cannot emerge from nothing. He demonstrated that only the US has all of the 5 known strains of the virus, while Wuhan and most of China have only 1, as do Taiwan and South Korea. Thailand, Vietnam, Singapore, England, Belgium, and Germany, consisting of the thesis that the haplotypes in other nations may have originated in the U.S. Korea and Taiwan have a different haplotype of the virus than China, perhaps more infective but much less deadly, which would amount for a death rate only of 1 in 3, that of China. Neither Iran nor Italy have included in the above tests, but both countries have now deciphered the locally prevalent genome and have declared them of different varieties from those in China, which means they did not originate in China, but were of necessity introduced from another source. It is worth noting that the variety in Italy has approximately the same fatality rate of that in China, 3 times that great as of other nations, while the haplotype in Iran appears to be the deadliest, with a fatality rate of between 10% and 25%. Due to the enormous amount of Western media coverage focused on China, much of the world believes the coronavirus spread to all other nations from China, but this now appears to have been proven wrong. With about 50 nations scattered throughout the world having identified at least 1 case at the time of writing, it would be very interesting to examine virus samples from each of those nations to determine the location of origin and the worldwide sources and patterns of spread. The virologist further stated that the U.S. has recently had more than 200 pulmonary fibrosis cases that resulted in death due to patients' inability to breathe. But those conditions and symptoms could not be explained by pulmonary fibrosis. He said he wrote articles informing the U.S. health authorities to consider seriously those deaths resulting from the coronavirus, as they responded by blaming the deaths on e-cigarettes and then silenced further discussion. The Taiwanese doctor then stated that the virus outbreak began earlier than assumed, saying we must look to September of 2019. He stated the case in September of 2019 where some Japanese traveled to Hawaii and returned home infected. People had never been to China. This was 2 months prior to the infections in China and just after the CDD suddenly and totally shut down the Fort Detrick bioweapons lab, claiming the facilities was insufficient to prevent the loss of pathogens. He said he personally investigated those cases very carefully, as did the Japanese virologist who came to the same conclusion. This might indicate the coronavirus has already spread in the US, but where the symptoms were being officially attributed to other diseases and thus possibly masked. Just for information, in the past 2 years during the trade war, China has suffered several pandemics. February 15, 2018, H7N4 bird flu sickened at least 1,600 people in China and killed more than 600. Many chickens killed. China needs to purchase U.S. poultry products. June 2018, H7N9 bird flu, many chickens killed. China needs to purchase U.S. poultry products. August 2018, outbreak of African swine flu, same strain as Russia from Georgia, millions of pigs killed. China needs to purchase U.S. pork products. May 24, 2019, massive infestation of armyworms in 14 province-level regions in China, which destroy most food crops, quickly spread to more than 8,500 hectares of China's grain production. They produce astonishing numbers of eggs. China needs to purchase U.S. agricultural products, corn and soybeans. December 2019, coronavirus appearance puts China's economy on hold. January 2020, China is hit by a highly pathogenic strain of bird flu in Hunan province. Many chickens died, many others died. China needs to purchase U.S. poultry products. The standard adhesives is that the bad luck happens in threes, not sixes. And more on it is another one by Larry Romanoff off of Global Research. This one published March 11th, 2020, with the topic of COVID-19, further evidence that the virus originated in the U.S. As readers will recall from the earlier article above, Japanese and Taiwanese epidemiologists and pharmacologists have determined that the new coronavirus almost certainly originated in the U.S., since that the country is the only one known to have all 5 types, from which all others have descended. Wuhan in China has only one of those types, rendering it in analogy as a kind of branch, which could not exist by itself but must have grown from a tree. The Taiwanese physician noted that in August of 2019, the U.S. had a flurry of lung pneumonias or similar, which the Americans blamed on vaping from the e-cigarettes, but which, according to the scientists, the symptoms and condition could not be explained by e-cigarettes. He said he wrote in the U.S. officials, telling them he suspected those deaths were likely due to the coronavirus. He claims his warnings were ignored. Immediately prior to that, the CDC totally shut down the U.S. military's main biolab at Fort Detrick, Maryland, due to a scene of safeguards against pathogen leakages, issuing a complete cease and desist order to the military. It was immediately after this event that the e-cigarettes epidemic arose. We also had the Japanese citizens infected in September of 2019 in Hawaii. People who had never been to China. These infections occurring on U.S. soil long before the outbreak in Wuhan were only shortly after the locking down of Fort Detrick. Then on Chinese social media, another article appeared. Aware of the above but presenting further details, it stated in Part 5, foreign athletes or other personnel visiting Wuhan from the World Military Games, October 18th to 27th, 2019, were hospitalized in Wuhan for an undetermined infection. The article explains more clearly that the Wuhan version of the virus could have come only from the U.S. because it is what they call a branch, which could not have been created first because it would have no seed. It would have to have been a new variety spun off the original trunk, and that trunk exists only in the U.S. There has been much public speculation that the coronavirus had been deliberately transmitted to China, but according to the Chinese article, a less sinister alternative is possible. If some members of the U.S. team at the World Military Games 18 to 27th of October had become infected by the virus from an accidental outbreak at Fort Detrick, it is possible that, with a long initial incubation period, their symptoms might have been minor, and those individuals could easily have toured the city of Wuhan during their stay, infecting potentially thousands of local residents in various locations, many of whom would later travel to the seafood market from which the virus would spread like wildfire, as it did. That would account also for the practical impossibility of locating the legendary patient zero, which in this case has never been found, since there would have been many of them. Next, Daniel Lucy, an infectious disease expert at Georgetown University in Washington, said in an article in Science magazine that the first human infection has been confirmed as occurring in November 2019, not in Wuhan, suggesting the virus originated elsewhere and then spread to the seafood markets. One group put the origin of the outbreak as early as 18th September 2019. Wuhan seafood market may not be the source of novel virus spreading globally. Description of earliest cases suggests outbreak began elsewhere, the article states. As confirmed cases of a novel virus surge around the world with worrisome speed, all eyes have so far focused on a seafood market in Wuhan, China as the origin of the outbreak, but a description of the first clinical cases published in Lancet on Friday challenges that hypothesis. The paper, written by a large group of Chinese researchers from several institutions, offers details about the first 41 hospitalized patients who had confirmed infections with what had been dubbed 2019 novel coronavirus 2019 nCoV. In the earliest case, the patients began ill on the 1st of December 2019 and had no reported link to the seafood market, the authors report. No epidemiological link was found between the first patients and later cases, they state. Their data also show that in total, 13 of the 41 cases had no link to the marketplace. That's a big number, 13, with no link, says Daniel Lucy. Early reports from Chinese health authorities and the World Health Organization had said the first patient had onset of symptoms on the 8th of December 2019, and those reports simply said many cases had links to the seafood market, which was closed on the 1st of January. Lucy says if the new data are accurate, the first human infections must have occurred in November 2019, if not earlier, because there is an incubation time between infection and symptoms surfacing. If so, the virus possibly spread silently between people in Wuhan and perhaps elsewhere before the cluster of cases from the city's now infamous Hunan seafood wholesale market was discovered in late December. The virus came into that marketplace before it came out of the marketplace, Lucy asserts. China must have realized the epidemic did not originate in that Wuhan Hunan seafood market, Lucy told Science Insider. Christine Anderson is an evolutionary biologist at the Scripps Research Institute who has analyzed sequences of 2019 nCoV to try to clarify its origin. He said the scenario was entirely plausible, as infected persons bring the virus into the seafood market from somewhere outside, according to the Science article. Anderson posted his analysis of 27 available genomes of 2019 nCoV on the 25th of January on a virology research website. It suggests they had a most recent common ancestor, meaning a common source, as early as the 1st of October 2019. It was interesting that Lucy also noted that MERS was originally believed to have come from a patient in Saudi Arabia in June of 2012, but later and more thorough studies traced it back to an earlier hospital outbreak of unexplained pneumonia in Jordan in April of that year. Lucy said that from stored samples from people who died in Jordan, medical authorities confirmed they had been infected with MERS virus. This would provide impetus for caution among the public in accepting the official standard narrative that the Western media are always eager to provide, as they did with SARS, MERS, and Zika, Zika, all of which official narratives were later proven to have been entirely wrong. In this case, the Western media flooded their pages for months about the COVID-19 virus originated in the Wuhan seafood market caused by people eating bats and wild animals. All of this has been proven wrong. Not only did the virus not originate in the seafood market, it did not originate in Wuhan at all. And it has now been proven that it did not originate in China, but was brought to China from another country. Part of the proof of this assertion is that the genome varieties of virus in Iran and Italy have been sequenced and declared to have no part of this variety that infected China and must by definition have originated elsewhere. It would seem the only possibility for origination in the US because only the country has the tree trunk of all the varieties, and it may therefore be true that the original source of the COVID-19 virus was the U.S. military biowarfare lab at Fort Detrick. This would not be a surprise given that the CDC's completely shut down Fort Detrick, but also because, as I related in the earlier article, between 2005 and 2012, the U.S. had experienced 1,059 events where pathogens had either been stolen or escaped from American biolabs during the prior 10 years, an average of one every 3 days. And then the last little write-up from a different web page. This one's from sputniknews web page, a write-up by Finian Cunningham, published on the 12th of March 2020, and with the topic of America's wages of sin. And a quote here, I believe, which is from Donald Trump. The virus will not have a chance against us. No nation is more prepared or more resilient than the United States, said President Trump in a televised nationwide address this week from the Oval Office in a bid to claim growing apprehensions over the coronavirus global pandemic. Trump's bravado, however, only serves to heighten concerns because it suggests this president and his administration haven't a clue about the dangers being faced. From either initial denials about the disease to prayerful invocations for its passing to the White House clampdown on sensitive information reaching the public, the prognosis is for a severe epidemic of the deadly flu virus in the U.S. The improbable, relatively low level of infections and deaths so far compared with other nations is more indicative of negligent testing and containment measures by the U.S. authorities. Trump's belated and dramatic travel ban from European countries was presumably meant to show President flexing leadership muscles. That move is no doubt futile because the disease has already reached the U.S. population and now it is set for an explosive contagion. The U.S. is the only developed country where workers are not entitled to stationary paid sick leave, as the New York Times editorial board noted this week. As the coronavirus spreads, the public interest demands that employers abandon their long-standing resistance to paid sick leave. It seems almost incredible that in a supposedly advanced nation, workers are largely denied such a basic right. Some 32 million American workers are estimated to be without any form of sick pay. Most of them are in low-wage service sector jobs, the very sector where public infection is at greatest risk of spreading. Many of America's working poor do not have health insurance, and those that do cannot afford to use their cover out of fear of exorbitant payback costs. The fiendish upshot, as other commentators have remarked, is the U.S. workers cannot afford to take hospital tests for the coronavirus, nor afford to take time off if they are suspected of having the infection. 2 weeks without pay would be financial ruin for families already living from paycheck to paycheck. As China and South Korea has demonstrated, the key to effective containment of the disease is rapid and widespread testing, quarantining, and treatment. Such a response is not systematically possible in the U.S. because of the precocious wage-slave nature of the labor market. Of course, these abject social conditions prevailed before Trump became president 3 years ago. Indeed, for decades, the U.S. economy has become predicted on low-wage service jobs where workers' rights have been gutted. Trump is but a continuation of an ongoing class war against American workers, whereby wealth has been massively redistributed to corporate bosses and stock market vehicles which benefit the top 1% in society. For this upper stratum, profits and dividends have never been so lucrative, and to be sure their economy looks super fine and dandy. For the majority, though, a very different perspective prevails. After years of chronic impoverishment through stagnating wages and crumbly employment conditions, workers in the U.S. and more vulnerable than ever to economic calamity, be that from a disease epidemic or property market crash. This is why America's wages of sin are inviting a coronavirus epidemic from hell. The relatively low rates of infection so far, for a population of 327 million, belie a catastrophic latency for the disease because so many workers are necessarily in denial about the illness and its risks. Trump and Congress have ordered emergency funding of around $8 billion to counter the epidemic, but the problem is one of endemic social conditions of massive inequality, poverty, derelict workers' rights, and a healthcare system driven by commercial profit. That militates against the very rapid response that is required to contain the disease. As tens of millions of American workers struggle into insecure jobs and zero-hour contracts at restaurants, bars, cleaning services, social care, public transport, and so on, the risk of disease contagion becomes ramifying. After the disease gains critical mass, then any public health facilities will be overwhelmed. Donald Trump's insufficience about his nation's resilience could not be more misplaced. That's hardly surprising coming from a billionaire president whose elitist worldview is typically informed by roaring stock markets and effervescent investor dividends. Those indices no longer buoyant now. For many working Americans, life is on a precipice. This coronavirus is threatening to push millions of them over the edge. Ironically, the presidential candidate who has been calling for improving workers' pay and rights as well as a proper universal public health care system, Bernie Sanders, is being sidelined by the Democratic Party leadership and its media backers. The coronavirus crisis stalking the U.S. makes the case for Sanders' socialist manifesto better than any other argument. I hope you enjoyed all those write-ups, everybody. It'd be awesome if you leave me some comments. It'd be great if you subscribed. We'll see you in the next one, everybody. Thanks a lot. Bye.